Boa tarde, sejam bem-vindos à sessão de encerramento da exposição Geografias Construídas, Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Vai abrir este momento o diretor executivo da Casa da Arquitetura, Nuno Sampaio. Chamo os arquitetos David Adjaye e Nuno Grande para a muito aguardada conversa do dia.
Ora, muito boa tarde a todos. Muito obrigado por terem vindo. Este é o momento de encerramento de uma exposição que leva 470 dias aberta, com a curadoria da Vanessa Grossman, aqui presente, e que fará um encerramento condigno em memória do Paulo também, e do Jean-Louis Cohen, co-curador da exposição, que os dois, naturalmente entusiasmados com o projeto, e que faleceram durante o processo da exposição. O Paulo primeiro, no arranque, enquanto pensávamos a exposição, e muito satisfeito de ter os dois como curadores, e o Jean-Louis já depois da exposição aberta, e muito brevemente, já está impresso, chegará até nós um excelente livro. Eu não direi que será o melhor do Paulo Mendes da Rocha, mas um muito profundo, transversal trabalho feito pelos curadores, enquanto editores deste livro, produzido pela Casa, sobre a exposição e o trabalho do Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Esta exposição, que depois, inclusivamente, terá uma visita guiada pela curadora, que fez uma primeira visita no primeiro dia e que fará uma visita agora no último fim de semana, mostra um trabalho de uma pessoa fantástica, amigo pessoal de muitos de nós, passou por aqui, é sócio honorário da Casa da Arquitetura, esteve aqui com uma primeira exposição quando inaugurou o Infinito Vão, e que nessa exposição, que falava entre duas casas, uma construída em São Paulo e outra construída em Lisboa, que curiosamente é uma das dos dois trabalhos feitos pelo Paulo Mendes da Rocha fora do Brasil, é o Museu dos Coches, onde eu colaborei com ele e onde eu conheci há alguns anos esta parte, e a Casa Quelhas, que fez com Inês Lobo. O Paulo Mendes da Rocha, conhecido de todos nós, doou o seu acervo em vida, assinou um contrato meses antes daquilo que nós saberíamos que ia ser um período, digamos, difícil para a humanidade, que foi as quarentenas e o Covid. E, curiosamente, quando fizemos esse contrato de doação em São Paulo, começamos logo a pensar no que poderia ser a vinda do acervo e o que fazer com o acervo. E o acervo veio para Portugal entre a primeira e a segunda quarentena do Covid. E imediatamente começamos a trabalhar com os curadores para rapidamente começar a preparar esta exposição que ainda está patente. Foram mais de 25 mil pessoas que a visitaram, a exposição. O Paulo tinha um interesse muito específico quando nos doou o acervo, era que ele pudesse estar acessível e seja estudado pelos estudantes de arquitetura. Era para eles que era destinado o acervo, e também com a coordenação do arquiteto Nuno Grande, aqui presente, que foi júri de um concurso para bolsas. Algumas das bolsas que a Casa irá atribuir serão sobre o estudo da obra do arquiteto Paulo Mendes da Rocha, que nos deixa naturalmente muito felizes. Eu quero, para além de nomear uma vasta equipa da Casa da Arquitetura que esteve a trabalhar neste processo, não só de produção, de comunicação, para a montagem de todo este evento que foi esta grande exposição, uma pessoa muito importante para nós, que não está aqui hoje presente, que está no Brasil, Cátia Otondo, que teve como obrigação, a incumbência, o gosto também, de organizar todo o material de acervo que estava no escritório do Paulo Mendes da Rocha, com uma equipa contratada pela Casa da Arquitetura em São Paulo, organizar, fotografar, tratar do processo legal e trazer para a Casa da Arquitetura, que hoje está aqui, e Eduardo Sotomoura, que desenhou a exposição com o design dos R2, também presentes. O Jean-Louis fez uma, a quem eu trago um muito obrigado, obviamente, para quem participou neste processo de construção da exposição e teve o Jean-Louis como parceiro, sabe do imenso conhecimento e do gigante que era a pessoa do Jean-Louis. E, portanto, eu não queria terminar esta exposição, que estará patente e que já estamos a trabalhar para que ele possa ir a vários países mostrar o trabalho do arquiteto Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Não queria deixar de referir um muito obrigado a todas estas pessoas envolvidas, naturalmente aos curadores, à Vanessa, que nós sabemos que durante este processo, com a morte de Jean-Louis Cohen, sofreu também como nós e ficou subcarregada com um trabalho que precisávamos de acabar, que era o catálogo, e que tardou, por tudo isto, mais do que o tempo que nós gostaríamos, mas que estará muito brevemente e que eu posso dizer que será, talvez em primeira mão, de forma pública, lançado em Nova Iorque no mês de novembro. Tivemos também um conjunto de ações do programa paralelo que tiveram mais de 3.000 pessoas e que hoje encerra com o David Adjai. I want to thank you came to Casa da Arquitetura. It's a friend of Casa da Arquitetura too. E ao Nuno, que se disponibilizou para maravilhosamente encerrar com esta conversa este longo período em que a exposição teve patente, em que tivemos mais de 3.000 pessoas connosco a debater, a ouvir sobre o Paulo. Muitas delas vieram naturalmente fora do Brasil e que eu quero a todas essas pessoas que participaram connosco, que vieram aqui, que partilharam experiências, conhecimento, um agradecimento muito especial. E, obviamente, eu não posso deixar de referir uma frase do Paulo Mendes da Rocha, que muito, também neste processo com a morte de Paulo Mendes da Rocha, que muito nos marcou e que nos vem à cabeça quando falamos de Paulo Mendes da Rocha. É que sabemos que vamos morrer, mas não nascemos para morrer, nascemos para continuar. E eu não diria que este dia, ou este fim de semana de encerramento dessa exposição, é um primeiro momento que encerra um tempo de continuação do Paulo Mendes da Rocha, com o seu trabalho, com as lições que nos foi dando, com as mensagens que nos foi transmitindo, e haverá, naturalmente, outros momentos que a Casa da Arquitetura quer levar e quer construir para homenagear essa grande pessoa que foi Paulo Mendes da Rocha. A todos os que participaram, sabendo que a Vanessa irá terminar depois desta conversa com digamos, eu diria, algo que já preparou sobre as duas pessoas tão queridas para nós, Paulo Mendes da Rocha e Jean-Louis Cohen, que seguramente estarão a conversar do outro lado e a rirem-se, a olhar para isto tudo. Agradecer-vos a todos, agradecer ao David, ao Nuno e toda a minha equipa que participou nisto e que tornou esta tão difícil tarefa que foi trazer o acervo, mostrar e editar o livro que ainda virá e trazer tanto debate sobre Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Muito obrigado a todos que participaram. Boa conversa, Nuno. Muito obrigado.
Okay, I'm going to switch to English.
Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank the invitation to be here. It's a privilege of being in the closing session of such an extraordinary exhibition. I want to congratulate Vanessa for the exhibition, but I would like also to pay a tribute to Jean-Louis Cohen, a good friend. Nuno was mentioning a phrase that Paulo Mendes da Rocha used to quote about life, about being born, knowing that we are going to die. A phrase by Hannah Arendt, who says, "We know we are going to die, but we know that we were born so that we can continue." So we were not born to die, we were born to continue. And I think when we think about Jean-Louis Cohen, we have to think about this continuity. Because Jean-Louis had also this gift, he was also ubiquitous, the gift of ubiquity. He was everywhere. He would be opening different exhibitions at the same time, advising people at the same time, researching on different things at the same time, and always giving his intellectual generosity to the others, to his students, to his friends. And that's why I think he's also here today, in this ubiquity sense. He's also here, not in this mystical religious idea that he's here but he's in each one of us who had the privilege of working with him, and those who didn't will understand that we have so much to learn from the way he taught us to think about the world, not just about architecture. So every time we will research on something, or we will analyze a document, or write a text, or curate an exhibition, I think we should remember Jean-Louis Cohen's generosity, intellectual generosity, and how somehow his legacy is in each one of us, and it will be always in each one of us. So I ask for an applause to Jean-Louis Cohen's legacy. Well, and we are here today to speak about Paulo Mendes da Rocha, but we are also privileged to have David AJ with us. I'm not going through his curriculum, he's well known, and he's going to talk about himself a lot, because we have prepared somehow some topics, and this will help to discover David's view over some of the things that Mendes da Rocha spoke about and wrote about. So, David, welcome. Thank you very much. It's also a privilege to have you here. And the first topic of conversation I would like to have with you is, of course, your relation with Portuguese-speaking cultures, not only in Africa, but also in Portugal, where you have worked with Eduardo Souto de Moura for a short period, but also Brazil. I want to know how did you discover Brazilian architecture? And of course, if you have to elect one of Paulo de Mendes da Rocha work, what would it be? So that's the, let's say, the TV first question. How is this relationship with Portugal and the Portuguese-speaking culture?
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 questions in there, but I shall attempt to go through it.
Yes, and we're going to see some pictures of the exhibition that it was held in the Venice Biennale, where David was one of the key architects being shown, but also some pictures of this exhibition. So we're not talking about the picture, but it will help to somehow contextualize some of the things you're going to say.
Yeah,
but talk me about this Portuguese-speaking.
Yeah, no, I think
culture.
my encounter with Portuguese architecture came through my dear friends who were actually in the crowd, architects Jorge and Teresa, who were really I think we knew about the work that was happening in Portugal, but we only knew it through books, and it was really the encounter in London with Jorge Carvalho and Teresa Gonçalves that we really, with my then partner at the time, came to Portugal in the early 90s, and she worked with Cesar and I worked with Eduardo. And they were incredibly generous in opening our eyes to a way of making architecture, which is very different to the North European tradition. And, it really, in summary, just to say that it was really, for me, a moment when I think I was very deeply engaged with architecture, but I fell in love with architecture. It was a kind of very, very, very emphatic analysis of a work, and to be able to see the production of the work in that proximity at that time in the early 90s when the work was still very much forming to what we now know it to be. So an engagement with the Iberian Lusophone sort of world had started, and it sort of spread to South America and to Mozambique, and you know, to really understand the impact of the Iberian world and the sort of the making of that architecture. I also then re-engaged very much when I started to, in the beginning of sort of 2000, I started to really engage with Africa much more deeply with a series of research visits. I visited all 54 countries of the continent. And in that time, I became much more, again, fascinated by what was happening in South America and the South American architects that had really been about the sort of post-independence construction in this tropical world. So that, you know, my engagement has been oscillated through two lenses, through an intimate relationship with friends and also a kind of curiosity about a sort of theoretical position about how an architect positions himself within the world.
And when we were with Eduardo, he used to speak, of course, of Brazilian architecture.
Yes, yes.
Were you already aware of Mendes da Rocha work at the time, or did
I
you
think-
discover it later?
Yeah, I think I was much more aware of, you know, of Oscar Niemeyer and
Niemeyer.
Chia Costa and those characters. Paulo Mendes' work really came later, but when I, sorry, bring it on. Okay, so when I engaged with his work, I completely became very, very fascinated, and when I started to sort of engage with the writing, or not the writing because he's not really a writer, but the sort of theories that I started to see, this relationship between architecture and geography, essentially, I became very engaged because in a way, at the same time, I was in my tour, which lasted about 10 years, from 2000 to 2011, I was very much traversing the continent of Africa, and really what struck me very profoundly was the way in which civilizations and geographies were formed across the continent. Because in a way, the continent of Africa has every geography that is on the planet, more or less. There are glaciers, there are mountains, there are deserts, the whole thing.
So when did you get to Brazil? Did you recognize most of this survey that you had
It started to
seen in, for example, the big metropolis in Africa? We can establish a parallel with the big metropolis in Latin America.
But it's very different. But yes, but there are these metropolitan conditions, you know, of Lagos, of Cairo, of these super metropolitan sort of cities. And when you go to São Paulo or you know, or any of the other sort of metropolitan cities, there was this idea of, you know, in these new geographies, sort of understanding how architecture was operating.
Okay. And your recent trip to Brazil, you have visited some Mendes da Rocha's work.
Yes, yes, yes.
Is there any highlight that you would like to?
No, we were just talking with Vanessa and was saying how struck I was. You know, I visited a few projects, but I was very struck by the arch,
The plaza.
the plaza,
Patriarca.
the Patriarca Arch. I was struck by it because I remember seeing it in the 90s and thinking how profoundly moving it was to see this incredible sort of station canopy, and it's a continuous theme in Rocha's work, which I find really profound. His ability to reduce architecture, to keep reducing architecture, removing interiority, and somehow by removing as much interiority, somehow maximizing a sense of sort of comfort with the most minimal set of devices. And for me, the arch was a kind of profound moment, really, obviously, as Vanessa told us, registering between the old and the new city, but this, you know, delicacy of using a very simple but very complex piece of engineering to create this thing. But, you know, what struck me was how, you know, it is now not in a very good situation, but it become a sort of home of the homeless. And so
The shelter now.
the shelter, yeah, the canopy has become a kind of shelter. I know that they're hopefully going to try and rehabilitate it, but you know, it was again this idea of, ironic to me that actually you would think homeless people would want to hide, you know, in the shadows, but they actually went into the center of this thing. It's almost like that the canopy was a kind of symbol that they had, you know, it was a very powerful image that me and my wife were struck by very
Yeah.
much. We spent a lot of time there just
So
observing
it gives a purpose to the
Yeah, it
idea
had a
of
kind of much
architecture
more-
as a shelter.
Yeah, it
And
was
as a
kind of-
public space at the same time.
It was this very technologically sophisticated thing that acted like a primary, almost mother-like sort of receiver, you know, and it was very emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, talking about geography, I have to advise Vanessa's text in the catalog, which is going to be out soon. And I will take this idea of geography to talk about the global south
Yeah.
and the relation between Africa and Latin America. I think what is parallel in these two continents is the way geography becomes a monumental issue
Yeah.
that architects have to deal with. But Mendes da Rocha had a very interesting, not politically correct position about geography and nature. He would say that nature can become a trambolho, a mess, a chaos, that architects have to team, to tempt.
A provocation.
So the idea is that there's a mission for architects, and this mission is to somehow understand nature, but transform it, infrastructure it, correct water courses. There's this mythical project of linking the Amazons to Rio da Prata, demolish mountains if necessary, build cities, create somehow a human device for living. So I normally say, and I think I take it from Vanessa's text, that Paulo de Mendes da Rocha was an enthusiast of the Anthropocene.
I think you're being very
Which,
provocative.
in a way, he believed in mankind and in its capacity to transform. How do you position yourself with
Yeah,
this new
no.
theme that, well, I know that today a
Yeah.
lot have been written about climate changes and
Yeah,
Anthropocene.
so he's a pre-climate change architect, and he's an architect where the ideas that we understand about how, you know, industrialization, mass agriculture, and 20th century sort of effects on the planet we understand the impacts of these things. And I think in his time, because of population explosion and the kind of ability to solve housing and food crises and all these things, that was the solution, right? It felt like the solution. But for me, you know, I think that there is a kind of dialogue that happens in architecture, but the work itself speaks another language. And so for me, looking at the work and seeing how he positions the work, I think is much more, for me, revealing about the intention, the invisible intention. And for me, Paulo Mendes Rocha is very, very romantic. He's deeply romantic.
So it's a romantic view of the nature, of nature.
There's a kind of serious discussion about, you know, controlling nature, but for me, there's a kind of romance with the power of nature and the idea of the frame of architecture and its relationship to it. I think that the language in the 20th century was always about domination and control, and I think this was just a language misuse. I think that I actually firmly believe that I think it's about creating a symbiosis with nature. And for me, in Mendes Rocha's architecture, if you look at the sections, he's always climate moderating. He's moderating continually a comfort zone for the human being to be able to be coexistent. And unlike other architects, he's moderating the climate not from an interiority. It's not a Miesian control. It's not a kind of glazed frame that holds it. It is a relational, environmental one that is always in this section talking about, for me, this porosity and this way in which, you know, going back to the arch, the way in which the edge of the arch is enough to give that comfort, you know, and I found that very, very instructive and powerful in his work. And in fact, for me, you know, when I recently came back from Sao Paulo, some of the things I was discussing with my partner and my friends were just the idea of a kind of incredible dignity in Paulo Rocha Mendes. You know, that there's a kind of socialist agenda, but that's the political. But the dignity is a kind of humanist desire to kind of create the most good for everyone. And I find that really compelling as an architectural concept that I think is very prevalent now. We are in a world of extreme polarities, and I think that thinking, you know, we have sort of processed a world of late capitalism and, you know, sort of massive, rampant capitalist privatization. And, you know, I think Mendes Rocha is a kind of a sort of prophet, if I use not in the religious sense, but a sort of shaman screaming about not forgetting the dignity of being human and our collective humanity.
Yeah, you talked about humanity on horizontality.
Yeah, horizontality. And I
Yeah.
think he's a horizontal because he's humanist. The horizon is about the human view, right?
And he didn't design a lot of skyscrapers. He was always
few.
looking for this
Horizon line.
horizon, the geographical
Yeah.
horizon. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea of cross section.
The cross section.
It's also how we cross from one place
side
to another.
to the other. Yeah.
But anyway, he would be very enthusiastic about cities, about the metropolis.
Completely.
How cities are the place of gathering, of
Yeah.
creating knowledge, of going to school.
Yeah.
He would always address this idea of the city as a school. And he has this very interesting phrase about Rio de Janeiro, about the song of Antonio Carlos Jobim. The beauty about this song is not because we see the Corcovado and the mountain, how beautiful, but it's because we are seeing it from a window.
frame, yeah.
So we are seeing it from architecture.
Yeah.
So he believed in architecture as a filter, and he believed in the city, in the metropolis, as a filter to understand nature that surrounds us.
Yeah, I think that's what he said. Yeah, I'm more and more not interested in how, even sometimes I describe my own work, and I'm very much interested in the way in which the work actually affects people in the world. So, I think that those are very, like there were 19th century conversations about the picture frame.
Yeah.
And, it is a colonial construction, this idea of the protection of architecture that saves you from the sort of
nature.
wildness of nature, which is also a metaphor of the two worlds. And so there's a kind of fraught sort of discourse in this thing, but I think it was part of the 20th century's kind of, struggling and working through how to find language to deal with this. And I think that if he was here now talking with the climate crises in the world we're thinking, I would be fascinated to hear how
How he would
shift
react.
his language, because I think the language would be very different in the way in which he would position the essential elements. Because essentially, for me, if you look at, for instance, the house that he built for him and his sister, they're in this kind of intimate relationship of making something for your family member and yourself and your family that you're making. This, for me, primitive hut, it's an indigenous, it's a concrete cantilevering set of systems, but it's actually, it could be a kind of indigenous Indian architecture. It's stilettos, it is a platform to save you from the world, it has an overhanging roof that gives you a climate moderation, and he makes these windows that encourage breeze. So it's almost a direct translation of a kind of absolutely clear way of living in this tropical condition. But we get obsessed with the concrete and we get obsessed with all the things that we sort of miss the kind of fundamental principle of what the architecture is actually talking about. And for me, there's a lot of discussion right now about how you translate. A lot of architects are now interested in this thing about how do we work within different contexts. We can't just bring architecture and drop. And then there's a fashion for, I see this thing, so it'll be like this, and that's from that place. I think that, again, Mender Rocha is very instructive because he leads us to a way of understanding the symbol of maybe indigenous or indigenous forms and craft beyond the sort of the image of the artifact, to kind of ask you to really dive into what does your time do and what this thing can teach you about what you can make for the future. I really find it incredibly powerful. And in my work, I'm not trying to in any way compare, but I am very inspired by his ability. I always think that he makes architecture look incredibly simple. But it's a kind of resistance. It's a continual resistance in his work that meant that I think during his time, it was easier to do more than less. So he didn't get as much work as his contemporaries. His contemporaries were building as much as possible. But as we know, actually, in the end, the examples are much more profound in terms of the engagement. Because, we talk about now, how much architecture do we need to make? When we make architecture. And I think, again, this idea of infrastructures in cities and infrastructures in landscapes are really powerful. And that's his DNA. I went to the Coach Museum again to see it. And, as much as I was struck by the kind of formal party of the plaza and all those sort of things, I was this time struck by the way in which the bridge that connects the old part of the city right to the waterfront was a sort of almost like an artist journey of the narrative of, you know, of the city of Lisbon, and the way in which the bridge deposits you to that incredible sort of silent view of the water. You know, I mean, I could be making this all up in my head, but I don't think so, because I get the sense that this is a very deliberate man. And I was watching how people were just using this infrastructure, and it was a pure delight. It frames the old architecture of the city, and it frames the nature. And, you know, it's a very powerful instruction that even a very simple piece of infrastructure can have a kind of poetics about it that really elevates even the mundane. You know, you glimpse the water because it sparkles, the sun hits it a certain way, and for a moment you lose yourself, and then you go down to the train station or whatever. But these are magical moments that architecture is also capable of allowing us to understand in the world.
Yeah, but getting back to this geo-architecture, as Vanessa puts it in her text, or to this metropolis scale, you are also very fond of African metropolis.
Yes.
You did this survey and this book and this exhibition.
Yeah.
So there's another way of looking at mankind's
Produce.
capacity
Yeah.
to build cities.
Yeah.
Did your survey was looking for this huge scale, or trying to understand this humanity that you
Yeah.
were talking about? What
No,
did you
know,
want it to do?
personally, I was looking always for the humanity. What was very interesting about the African survey was the amount of imposed theories that were colliding against the natural nature of the cultures of the peoples that were there, and also the actual geography that was there. So in a way, the continent of Africa at the moment, in terms of its city buildings, is a kind of massive, I think, battleground of ideologies that are colliding. You know, amazing projects, but that are completely unsuited for communities and being overgrown and disregarded, but beautiful objects. Or colonial architecture, which is deeply problematic for the community in terms of history and heritage, but amazing examples of tropical responses. So it's a kind of continual condition of collisions.
Collisions.
Of collisions.
Conflicts.
Conflicts, yeah. And in a way, but I think that is the beginning of a very complex metropolitan architecture, the negotiation of different ideas. So I think that the continent, even in this kind of slightly brutal way in which it's emerged, it's metropolitan, is also having to negotiate the conditions, the real conditions of the metropolitan, in a way that the European city is having to learn how to adapt and grow a kind of metropolitan condition in all its cities. And it's a struggle because the history is so singular. And now, you know, how do you kind of make this machination? I'm not saying one is more than the other, but the other starts from a condition of collisions already, and one starts from a kind of idea of a certain vernacular. You know, it's fascinating. So I think that it means that there's a kind of opportunity on the continent to really have a kind of modulated set of works that really bridge across many issues. And I'm really interested in finding that. You know, so in some of my projects, you know, where we are working on things which look like churches, but they're actually social centers. We're working on hospitals, but they're actually community gathering places and signifiers in villages.
It's not about form; it's about program.
It's about the way in which the flexibility of the program is allowed to invade the architecture, even though there's a very strong immediate sense, and always being very cognizant of the fact that actually maybe what you think, or maybe what the political system or the social system thinks, is not necessarily what the architecture needs to be in the end. Because in a way, the programming is a kind of imposition that's learned. And Africa is trying to learn how to kind of write its own programs right now. It's a fascinating time.
Nice. Está-se a ouvir bem? Okay. So let's go to a second topic. You already addressed it, which is, of course, the legacy of colonialism and modernism in both continents. Of course, Paulo Mendes da Rocha he found colonialism despicable because it was, of course, the imposition of a northern culture into Latin America and Africa. Even if then he would be somehow fascinated by the infrastructural process of
Railways,
colonialism.
bridges, yeah.
Yeah, but then what is interesting in both continents is that for Brazilians and for most Latin Americans, because they got independent earlier, modernism was a way of emancipation.
Correct.
Of liberating themselves from the colonial styles and forms. And in Africa, colonialism went on being very associated to modernism.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah,
kind
it
of difference,
bridged.
no, between an oppressive modernism and a liberating modernism, let's say. Well, I'm simplifying.
No, no.
And the readings of course, Le Corbusier in both countries. Um, do you think in Africa today, modernism is also being, well, the Brazilians ate the European and regurgitated as Brazilian, you know, the anthropophagy, all this process that Brazilians
The
describe
Brazilians
so
built
well.
it. The Brazilians built it.
You have you feel that this same anthropophagy can be done with the African modernism, or it's a history that people want to forget and start over again?
No, no. I think it depends which region you're in. I think in West Africa, which is where the early independence movements were, modernism was very much the style like South America, and in fact, a lot of South American architects came in the early independence movement to help those African countries make a modern architecture. So there's a very strong relationship between South America and West Africa in terms of that building of that architecture. By the time it goes to East Africa and South, it's becoming part of the colonial legacy of colonial architects coming into Africa, like Jean Prouvé, etc., who people worship here, but actually is seen as a kind of terrible figure on the continent in Congo, etc., because it's about the extraction of aluminium and all these kind of industrial processes and the kind of, again, the extraction of the continent. So it becomes fraught later, but now there's a generation where the international style of modernism, and it's become transnational. I mean, it was transnational in its essence. It was meant to be a style going across nations, and it's become transnational. I think it's fulfilled its transnational role because there is Brazilian modernism, there is Spanish modernism, there is West African modernism, there's Indian modernism. Everybody's, it's fracturing into these sort of mutations of the same version of the thing, and it's becoming a style. So even in West Africa now, it's becoming a thing, because, at some point it's impossible to replicate a certain kind of house. There's two styles. There's either what I call hyper ridiculous postmodernism, Doric columns and tablatures, but no garden, a small tiny house behind it, or modernist buildings that are being built. But I think there's also an investigation now, not just on the image of the modernist buildings that we see in fashionable magazines and the internet, but a real investigation by a generation of architects that are interested in what if one is able to kind of make a much more connected relationship between the cultural sort of forms that are in the landscape, that were in the landscape, with the modernism that we have. So there's a kind of new.
Yeah, but then there's also the danger of mimicry.
Mimicry is
which is African architects feel obliged to be African in the way they use textures and forms coming from a kind of traditional architecture. Is this a trap?
It's a trap. It's a trap. It's any form of one of my professors, I can't remember which one, said to me, but any form of metaphor is deeply dangerous. But at the same time, the metaphor is really important. So it's a kind of double-edged sword where you need it, but also it's completely fraught with issues. It's easy to have something which you say, well, this is authentic, especially in a situation where you have colonial erasure of your original authentic architecture. So you grab onto other things. But I think that in the work of Mendes Rocha, you see an attempt to not have mimicry, but to have the essential essence. Now, this is obviously one way, and you could argue that there's many ways of looking at this, but I think that there's something very profoundly interesting about for me, I'm interested in dealing with the phenomenal industrialization of the 20th century and its ability to imprint onto what the 21st century is. So I'm not interested just in trying to find a kind of essential architecture that represents the continent. I'm interested in how do you co-opt or hack or reuse this incredible produce of the technology of the 20th century, but in a way that starts to produce new, surprising, and engaging consequences in the 21st century.
Without miming the African vernacular.
So for me, textures are universal. All these things are universal. So you can argue that one says it's African, but as long as, if you're doing a kind of Klaus Oldenburg where you just get a pin and you blow it up, it becomes an artwork. It's something else. But when you start to make it architecture, it's deeply problematic. You get a Disneyfication. But there is something about understanding what the pin is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a kind of halfway. It's a dance. But all systems are like that.
Okay. So you have lived this construction of these African identities when you were young, because your
I
father was a
mean,
diplomat, born in Ghana. You were born in Tanzania,
East Africa.
and you lived in different
South.
countries before you went to London.
Yeah.
So you have lived this idea or this wish
geographies.
of geographies, but also
Yeah.
this wish of building new identities.
Yes.
And in this construction of identities, colonialism was something to avoid, or something that we could.
So colonialism was the fraught pedagogy in the room that was full of solutions but deeply fraught because of its dark history. So you are looking at it, and as a sort of technical person, you appreciate it, but you're deeply fraught with the erasure of other pedagogies that could have also evolved. So for me, it's always been a struggle. I'm sort of agnostic to when I'm looking at architecture. I try not to moralize the architecture anymore, but I try to understand what the issues are and what the work is trying to do. So I'm less interested in the kind of the moral position of the choice than I am in what you can learn from it and what it gives you as a kind of operating strategy. It's maybe it's contentious, maybe it's not, but I feel that as a professional, your job is to find the most, in Roche's work, he finds a way to subvert always the thing that is actually being presented to him as the thing he should do. And I think that takes a lot of skill. In his work in the 20th century, I think infrastructure and structural excellence was still at an age where it was, before computers, structural engineering solutions were very much in a linear modernist trajectory. And we get to the 90s and we have a crash, and structure can be whatever you need it to be. There is no longer a search for an essentialism in structure. So his dialogue, which is a kind of beautiful one, is now not as easy to apply, because you can't argue that that's the only way to do it. That's been destroyed.
Yeah.
So his world is gone. And we inherit a different world of possibilities. So the question is, what is the choice within these possibilities that makes sense to the condition of what you're trying to do? And for in his time, what I love is the idea of the structural excellence manipulated with a kind of deep and keen sense of history could articulate incredible forms that could bridge between history and the industrialization and the technological world that was around. And it's harder in the 21st century.
And you think this is possible now in Africa?
I think it's possible in Africa, but
take advantage of what you said, capitalistic industry logic,
Yeah.
and try to be engaged with the local communities and try to make a kind of balance between both scales?
It's not so much of a kind of romance of trying to kind of do something that's about the local. I mean, it's what I mean is that there's still a sense on the continent that the industrialization is emerging, the industries are being born. So there's a way
You don't have to import technology anymore?
Well, we are importing, but also there are also the creation of industries coming up. And so there's a kind of, for a generation of architects on the continent now, the issue is, what do we push as the architecture that we want to see? Because that triggers the industrialization. So if you get the commissions, what are you promoting? What are you pushing becomes really, really important, because in a way, we've just recently finished a series of projects which are all about earth-based systems with frames, with steel, just looking at the conditions. And suddenly there's now an explosion of contractors in West Africa, in Ghana, who do earth projects. And there are now companies wanting to set up factories to do prefabricated earth wall systems. And it all comes from these projects that were just started. When we started these things, there was nobody to do it. We had to go get people from Australia to come to Ghana to teach, how to do this.
Yeah. Okay, staying in the Global South and the African issue, let's talk about how the Global South is seen from the North, the Global North. And we are seeing some images of your exhibition, your spectacular exhibition and spectacular models in the Venice Architectural Biennale of the last year, no? curated by Leslie Loco, who is a good friend of yours. And we are all, of course, very enthusiastic about how Leslie addressed not only, or she's still addressing the African futures,
Yeah.
but how she gave Africa a much needed and urgent voice at this Biennale. But also this exhibition shows, not this, yours, shows how your commissions have developed, and you're somehow making a leap forward in these
It's changed.
big commissions. So you were one of the key artists or architects
Exhibitors.
exhibited in the exhibition. But let me be a little bit provocative.
Yeah, totally.
When I visited it, I saw Africa portrayed by the global north scholars, the global
The
north
diaspora.
researchers of course, of the African diaspora. But it was very much overview or an analysis coming from the north over Africa. And I thought maybe it's good to be in comfortably in the north,
And look
paternalizing Africa in this way. Well, I'm being provocative.
No,
of
it's
course.
good. It's a great question. It's a great
but,
question.
But anyway, Africa is the subject.
Yeah.
And as I said, this Biennale was urgent to be done.
Yeah.
But how do you see this idea that it's the task of the diaspora to talk about something that should come from the continent itself? How do you see this kind of
I mean,
provocation?
it's a kind of ridiculous situation, but you know, I've looked into it, and really, sometimes it just requires an other gaze to kind of show this thing. And I just think that actually it's ironic to me. I just look at what happened in China and the sort of wave of Chinese architects that came, and actually all of them went to Western universities and then came back and have completely revolutionized a kind of modern architecture in Asia. And you know, you can argue that happened in South America. You know, sort of Europeans that were educated, Lino Bobardi, etc., and came to South America and created a kind of
in this case, it's the Italian diaspora.
It's the Italian diaspora. So I think that there's something not to be underestimated about what I call, you know, the way in which the diaspora is a central figure in the imagination of you know, the modernities of places. It's to do with simply, you know, the internet has shifted it, but it's simply to do with certain relationships to networks of power and networks of production. So yes, but I think in the end, it all comes together and it shakes away things that don't work. And what you start to see in what Leslie is showing is for the first time, a very keen interest by the diaspora to absolutely address the condition of the continent. And that can't be underestimated. There was not that sense, not even 20 years ago. And there is a sense now of wanting to absolutely, you know, Africans on the continent and the diaspora wanting to engage with the conversation of what this modernity is going to mean. And that, when you see the show, a lot of people were critical of the show, saying that the show is really, you know, there's not much architecture. You know, I had very famous architects that we all know.
We can say
walking
architecture is
around.
everything.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, saying, oh, there's not much architecture, David, you know, and I was like, what you're seeing here is a North Star show. It's pointing to a position which will become more important as time goes ahead. And what you're seeing is a generation of thinkers really who are going to influence, maybe not they're the ones who are going to build, but a generation behind them are going to be the ones that maybe build. But the ideas are being germinated. And I think that, you know, there's something very connected to the sort of aspirations of remaking the world in South America. That, you know, was about the independence movement and sort of breaking away from a European tradition, and modernism was that, but a kind of heroic belief that one could make a new world that is also now happening, I think, on the continent very much. This idea that maybe this is something one should take a hold of and try to find a position. Whether it's hopelessly romantic, it's irrelevant, right?
But so you're saying that Africa is a global issue.
It's a global issue.
So it can be looked at and analyzed from everywhere in the planet.
It can be analyzed from everywhere on the planet. And actually, Africa is not a homogeneous place. It is a diverse diaspora, even in the continent, from its, you know, more Arab Moorish north to its, you know, Zulu Bantu
You
south.
even have the black culture of in America, for example, for people that never went to Africa and somehow they tried to. Well, we're going to talk about
now
that
they're
later.
very
but-
much trying to come. But I always say that the continent has had many histories. So I said, the Moorish North, the sort of Bantu South, but the Asian sort of East, which is like people just misunderstand, and the sort of what I call, the sort of much more connected relationship to Europe on the West. So it's very much a metropolitan continent in the sense that it's always had these different conditions, always negotiating. So it's a very different kind of modernity. And the cities that are going to be made on the continent are not going to be like cities in Europe. They're like network cities that are coming. We know that the population growth in West Africa will create nodal cities that are completely new in terms of phenomenology and the way in which they infrastructure themselves. And they're being planned right now, the way they network together.
Leslie Loco says that people from the African diaspora feel more African when they are out of the continent.
Isn't that the
Far
same
away
old
from
diaspora? The diaspora is more
Yeah, but they feel
rigorous
more
outside.
African. they feel more African, the Africans themselves, well,
Yeah.
the people who stood there.
Yeah.
You yourself, well, for a long time you were an English architect or a British architect.
That's the press.
Or a Londoner. you were a Londoner architect.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you opened an office in Ghana and you
Yeah.
became an African architect.
Yeah, I never said any of those things.
Yeah, I know.
Just
Yeah, it's
slapping labels.
people label you.
Yeah.
But you also have an office in
New York.
So how do you feel yourself? You feel like you're a global architect, an African architect, a North architect?
This is a kind of ridiculous question.
Okay,
Why
I'm
can't-
ridiculous.
No, because why should there be a sense of that? Because for me, I think that's fundamentally bound with 19th century ideas of identity, which
Yeah.
I refute because I'm just not interested in the kind of closing of that. I'm a much more porous person in terms of, but I also understand the geography of place. So I love West Africa. It's very important to me. My ancestors come from there, but I'm also completely a person in the world. And I think that with the birth of technologies, architecture has fundamentally shifted in the sense that we can operate across different geographies, fundamental geographies, in a way that our peers, only a few were able to do it, and they would take months. The Frank Lloyd Wrights, the Kahns, would kind of, but they were like a handful. Everybody else was practicing in their local condition because it was too difficult. But I think that condition is now normalized. If you want it, to be able to collaborate and make works, if you choose it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a very exciting sort of new addition to the idea of what an architect is in the 21st century. That we are, I think, I hate the word global because it's economic,
Yeah.
but I think we are planetary architects. I always say to my students, and we are planetary, we are now engaged, especially with what is now happening, we are concerned with a planetary agenda, and the human condition is part of the large spectrum of the biosphere of this planetary condition, right? That's the architecture of now, right?
Yeah. We talked about one of your good friends, an artist, Theaster Gates,
Yes.
who was also at Venice Biennale
Yes.
in a very central position, because Theaster was not born in Africa.
No.
He thinks about all this relationship between America, Afro-American culture. Well, I would like to go on a little bit about the relation between your position as an architect and Theaster's as an artist, because you're good friends and somehow your work can be related with this view about the relation between North and South. No?
Yeah, I think Theaster is a really interesting provocateur, both within the African context, but also the American context. And I think what he's struggling with, and it's a struggle that's live, and he's very open about it, is the negotiation between what is a black modernity, and he's trying to construct it from the fictions of things like Jet magazine and the American world, which for me it's almost like the catalogs of the photographers. Who are the photographers that the Americans sent out to document the American landscape? Ansel Adams, Friedland, not Fried. All these characters, not Friedlander, but there's a whole gang of them. This idea of documentation, he sees that relationship to the archive of, let's say, magazines like Jet magazines, which set out photographers to document the black world all over the world. And he sees that fiction as an archive that he now wants to kind of use and produce from. And then within it, it's full of ruses and superficialities, but he doesn't care about the authenticity, but it's about the collected imagery of what that history could construct and how you could move from it. So I think Theaster is fascinating in terms of the way in which he's using archives and bodies of knowledge to imagine futures, right? I am very interested in archives, but I'm interested in archives that I'm making because I don't trust archives. So I'm completely the opposite of Theaster. I say that these archives are fictions, and I'm deeply troubled by them. So I want to make an archive through my body, right? So the archive is about how I document. So right now I'm documenting all the Caribbean islands, for instance. There are 32 inhabited islands. I've done about 18, and I'm just interested in the way in which the body makes information in the world and then puts it together, and then how, as a creative person, I'm using that information. So I'm interested in my own set of archives, my own set of references, and then my own sort of way of working from them. And it's a way to kind of create my own space of creativity, because I don't want to work within a postmodern condition.
Okay. So returning to architecture and Venice Biennale, it was interesting because being in an event about Africa, the Golden Lion was given to the Brazilian pavilion.
Yes.
And a pavilion that was very polemic because Gabriela de Matos and Paulo Tavares, the curators, were again addressing the post-colonial condition or neo-colonial condition of Brasilia, no? Because Brasilia, as I said, coming from the traditional historiography, was seen as a liberation moment of the Brazilians, but they say no, it was not. It was built by a white political elite in the continuation of global project and colonialism in the disadvantage of the local indigenous populations that lived there. So it's always this confrontation that colonialism as a ghost hunting us all the time, because of course it creates continuities, traces.
Yeah.
And talking about elites, well, I don't know if have you visited this pavilion, the Brazilian?
Yes, of course. I had to. Yeah.
And did you agree with the Golden Lion?
I thought it was controversial, but I understood why they did it. Yeah.
But speaking about elites, because they are still the ones who are somehow running some of these.
Yeah, this is the dilemma of the.
You work for elites, of course, in Africa.
I work for elites and non-elites.
Yes, and non-elites.
I don't have a problem with working for a spectrum of patrons.
Yeah.
What do you produce at the end from it is what's important to me.
Yeah. And Leslie Loco says that Africa's greatest contradictions is that it's the youngest continent on the planet in demographic terms, but that the majority of its leaders in several countries belong to an aging elite that doesn't really understand or capitalize on the homegrown creativity of the youth.
And that is now changing.
And now it's changing.
There's a massive youth movement, and it's because of the youth explosion that is insisting on the shift of this leadership.
Yes,
and so
they should.
From the outside, one is seeing and thinking, oh my God, all these coups. I mean, it manifests sometimes in radical sort of military sort of takeovers, which are deeply problematic, but also in Senegal, it manifests in a kind of shift of power to a much more, I would argue, a kind of sort of new educated elite, a new elite. They are another elite in it who are very interested in the kind of, you know, a sort of emancipation of their citizenry. But the irony is that, you know, it's an inherited system. You know, the governance of the continent is about elders knowing more. We have a history of that, and it's probably a global thing. But in Africa, it became a kind of absolute, you know, totem that is kind of almost irremovable. But the problem is that the difficulty of running a nation state in a global world requires more than just being a wise old man.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And so, and that struggle is now becoming really like a full, you know, the dialogue is that, you know, there's kind of these metaphors in traditional language about, you know, that ultimately you need a hydra to run the world, to run a nation. You need a multi-headed hydra. If you don't have a hydra, you can't run a nation because you need different heads to deal with different conditions. right? And there's a traditional saying that is about that. So it's a kind of struggle that it's
Yeah, but this elite are mostly your commissioners. How do you deal with these prefab ideas that normally this elite has on architecture, because they look at the north to this iconic architecture, or to Dubai,
Yeah.
the Dubai effect. How do you escape from this
Yeah.
kind of prefab commissions that they address you sometimes?
Architecture is fundamentally flawed because we have to get commissions from people who are very wealthy or in power. And if you have a kind of socialist view, this is a deeply problematic position. So there's a fundamental flaw, and you have to kind of come to terms with it. For me, that is not the question, because that's the contract. The success is what you do with it. The success is what you do with it. So, how do you work with, a client base that has a certain image of something when you feel that you have a different image to that? And how do you negotiate that? Are you polemical, or do you stand back, or do you engage? And I choose to engage and to see, romantically or hopelessly, whether there's an opportunity to do something. Because I just think to not engage is to allow this thing to absolutely go rampant. Because what happens is that because we live in such a globalized world, that they just import in the stuff. So the stuff just gets, you're not going to stop the stuff. The question is, can you shift the agenda?
Yeah.
And I think you can. I think you actually can.
So
and
it's like subverting the commission.
You have to. Paulo Rocha.
Yeah. Again, going to Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Yes.
Go inside and retool it. You have to retool it and show possibilities. For me, it's one of the smartest strategies, And I think as architects, especially working on the continent, but I think architects generally, even now in this what I call hyper-liberal capitalism, you have to operate like that, because otherwise your client knows as much as you do in terms of finishes and beautiful things. That's not where you're going to get your architecture. Can you go past that, and how do you go past that? Right?
Yeah. While we were talking about Mendes da Rocha, how he subverted the commissions, and my favorite project in the exhibition is this tower,
the athletics
with the pool on top, and how he built this kind of vertical utopia.
Yeah.
And
go see it. Yeah.
Well, when I look to your project now in Abu Dhabi, where you try to put in the same plot a mosque, a synagogue, and a Christian church, trying to create an ecumenic project, is also very utopian.
It's a total utopia.
Considering the geopolitical situation at the moment in the world.
Yeah.
The thing is, how can you subvert, or how can you add something to your commission that is not thinking about only the briefing that you had, but also about the whole community of people who are surrounding this project, and how can it invite people to be included?
So when we finished the project, when we did it, my project was the only one that proposed what it did.
Because this was a competition?
It was a competition. It was an international competition. Big names that were in it, and we won it. But some people made one space, one building, forcing a collision. And for me, the radicality was to remind the region that it had cities that had all these typologies right next to each other. If you look at downtown...
And all these religions.
Yes. If you look at the medieval quarter of Egypt, or of Damascus, etc., there's a synagogue next to a mosque, next to a church. And they were like in proximity to each other, and still are in some places, even though these things are sort of falling apart. And so in a way, this idea that somehow you would essentialize a Muslim country with just Muslim architecture and a Christian country with just Christian architecture is kind of absurd, because it never was that. It was about the civilizations interacting and creating a kind of harmony. So, for me, architecture was really complicit in this making this extremity, of a kind of nation-building Christian idea, by kind of creating these styles that were very much about celebrating a very particular aspect of Christianity. So the idea was to erase that. In that project, I was actually against architecture. That was the presentation. This is against architecture, even though it is architecture, and it's completely referencing it. It was like saying the argument to the jury was architecture is complicit in the divisions that have actually occurred by making people believe that they are different from each other, even though they worship the same God.
Wow. Uh, and that gives me the floor to talk about the Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington that you designed in the Washington Mall during the Obama administration. And I think it's so far your most global moment of recognition because you could work with a big brief about black culture,
Yeah.
about African roots.
Yeah.
But then when we look at this museum and the way all the narrative is built, it's mostly an American.
It's an American story.
So, so this idea of Afro-American culture, looking at its African roots, but then filtered by all the experience of slavery, how did that help you to think about this project? Or,
Yeah, no, so-
what about this Afro-American condition? What do you think about it?
No, I think it's such a fascinating condition of the diaspora in the world, you know, and there are many diasporas, right, that manifest themselves in many cities in the world. And for me, that project was about how do you make at once a distinct architecture, but one that also completely is connected to this place. So at once, you know, when we were doing it, we had so many arguments with conservators and historians who said this is absolutely against the master plan of this place. Only for it to be finished now, for people to say this completes the master plan of this place, because the master plan was envisaging an opportunity to create a landscape that would celebrate the diversity of the American idea. So the kind of Greek Enlightenment, which became the kind of key theme of a central part of it, was one part of that discourse. But Greek Enlightenment wasn't just, you know, that's also a fiction. It was constructed. Greek Enlightenment is based on Egyptian Enlightenment, of Persian Enlightenment. It's, you know, so we are all in interconnected situations. And the way in which we like to kind of distill history and think that it's distinct singularities is a really problematic way of kind of thinking intellectually about how we see the modern world. And I think that the density of the worlds that we're going into, you know, we're 8 billion going to 10 billion people, and cities are going to become more like city-states. The condition of cities has to really respond to this new plurality that's coming that can't be stopped. You know, there's a kind of temporary sense of we'll just, all foreigners stay away, we'll build high walls, but that's just a kind of joke. It's not going to work. Yeah.
But you, in a previous conversation we had, you said Afro-American culture is has a paradox in itself.
Totally.
Why?
Why does it have a paradox? Well, it's because inherently in the culture is this terrible trauma, you know, the trauma of erasure. So it's a kind of, you know, it's different to the Jewish condition, which doesn't have an erasure. It has an erasure of place, but not an erasure of identity. So the identity becomes the kind of the device that keeps the unity of the, whereas the African American community has an erasure of identity. So it finds itself spinning in a world that it doesn't understand, and it's trying to reconstruct a meaning within that world. So it's, for me, it's a very unique diaspora, and it's a very unique condition that the colonial project and slavery constructs that is a very different narrative to the displacements and diasporas that happened before it. It's a product of, you know, really the last, you know, our last 500 years, and it's a very unique kind of subjugation which creates a new identity in the world, and one that the world has to negotiate. That the person is this character but has had this entire almost operating software removed and told to start again. And then this, you know, you're sort of in this almost like a kind of, you know, sci-fi movie chasing the trope of a dream that you just have fragments of. It's like a classic sci-fi movie, you know, it's like spurts in the mind, you know? But you have to find what the identity is. And it's a very unique scenario.
Okay, so last question.
Okay.
And it's of course about the 21st century. We were talking about Paulo Mendes da Rocha, who is a heroic architect, or at least it comes from this tradition of one individual, one architecture. And when we're looking to what we can call the African momentum, we don't see a star system. We see different architects working on Africa or about Africa, and I'm talking, of course, of Francis Kéré, Kunle Adeyemi, or Mariam Kamara, who are, among many others, who are somehow trying to be part of a community of architects and not of a star system. So we are a little bit away from this 20th century iconic architecture
But
or
do you think we are?
hero architect. Well, at least
Do you think we are?
well, it's been very criticized.
No, I think it's very fashionable to be critical now.
Yes,
And
maybe it
it's,
is.
It's
Maybe
healthy.
it is. But my question is: do you think Africa needs a star system, or it's a completely new way of addressing
No,
the
I think
question?
that we are talking about people's creativity, which are archives, and ultimately authorship resides with the creator. So in the end, the archives become really important, and it's associated with a character. And time is what will kind of do that. Of course, I think that we are in Africa. There is not the sort of star system of the West, of a kind of a group that's just doing, but actually these young architects right now that you've mentioned, myself and I'm not young, but the younger generation
You
in
are.
their 40s are getting incredible commissions for young architects. You couldn't get that in Europe, most likely presidential centers or museum projects. So are they not the star architects of their time? They are, but we just don't like to say that that's what they are. I just think that that whole conversation is a kind of,
Yeah, we don't
it's a
need
kind
that
of
anymore.
silly conversation.
Yeah, we don't need that anymore,
No,
especially when.
it's completely not useful. It's there are authors, unless if we say that we are no longer going to have authorship.
Yeah, yeah.
And that for me is okay. So are we going to attack authorship? And if we do, fine. Then let's have a conversation about what is authorship and what is not authorship. What is collective and what is authorship? I'm always like, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So finally, you've been a young architect, a trainee in Porto. Then you went to London. I remember seeing some of your BBC serial on Dream, not
Spaces.
Dream
Dream
Spaces. Then you wrote books. So you use media as a way of portraying yourself and also the architecture of others and of the African continent. How do you see yourself today as an object of media attention?
It's part of it.
Yeah.
The media is a tough beast. My friends will say it's a kind of dragon with a terrible tail. So it will it beats you, it takes you, you ride it. It's part of it. But for me, when I was a young architect, the media the attention that I got was simply because I was seen as an exotic new person in the fields, because there simply were not that many of us. So it wasn't, I didn't court it. People thought I would go around and ask people to do interviews. How could I possibly do that? People would come to ask about the work. And, for me, for instance, doing Dream Spaces was a great opportunity to just use the BBC to have access to all these incredible places that I couldn't have access to. And I was like, wow, I get to go into these archives, I get to go to meet these incredible people. And I was a young architect, and I was like, this is an incredible situation. I didn't really care about the program as a program. It was more this ability to be able to kind of have access into a greater world. But it's become something where a lot of people have actually really enjoyed and still reference this program.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I don't know if we have time for questions,
Oh, I have to run.
but at least
worry.
one? No? Oh, you're the boss.
No, I have 20 minutes.
Okay, one question from the audience, because it's been a little bit kind of dialogue on this side, and we'd like to have dialogue on that side.
Yeah.
What did you think about Maputo, the city, side of it?
The what side of it?
The architectural side
yeah.
of Maputo.
Well, Maputo is fascinating. It's like Dakar to me. It's a kind of constructed, it's a Lusophone architecture that is constructed in this landscape. But there are these very interesting characters like Pancho Guedes who punctuate this Art Deco and modernist landscape with these sort of readings. So yeah, no, for me, cities are dynamic, live places. They're never finished. I never go to a city and think, oh, this is a beautiful finished thing. I'm always thinking about how the city evolves and grows. So what I see in Maputo or in Dakar is a history that has made the built environment what it is at that time. It's obviously changing. I mean, Maputo and Mozambique has found so much gas and oil, and if they get it right, it will totally change that entire city. It's promising to. The same with Dakar. You know, it's going to be totally different in 30 years to what it is now. So for me, it's fascinating to see the residue of how histories narrate the city and what the new generation is wanting to make out of the city. So, you know, I'm right now, you know, on my sort of posts, I'm revisiting and looking at the construction of cities on my Instagram, for instance. And I'm just doing it because I have so many people that I talk to about African cities and they just don't know anything about it. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to spend, you know, 52 weeks talking about every single African city and what the histories are and what the complicated constructions are. Boring, but really important to just have it as a body of work that's collected, there it's dissipated, and to understand that these are live, ongoing things. But it's also an incredibly exciting ground for, I think, a new generation of architects. Not just Africans, actually. I really don't think it's about Africans. I think it's about a planetary attitude to architecture that can work in different places and can present new ways of thinking that are empathetic to the human conditions there. The choice is the artist. I really don't think. I've seen it through a material expression or through a form-related expression. I don't like to structure it through that. You know, there's a kind of movement that wants to say the material can be the translation. I think it's one view. It's not the only view. No.
Another question?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think they can hear me.
I
but
can hear.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so generally, I would like to ask in this kind of conversation that we are having about the future vision of how we can change architecture models and the way it relates with landscape.
Yeah.
How could we think that we can change also the relationships that we are still having between landscape architects and architects on that plan?
That's a great question. That's a great question, and I think that there's a new reformatting. I find landscape architecture very fascinating right now, because there's a whole generation of landscape architects who are talking about it's not just about plants. It's really not, and it's about human beings and spaces and places and topographies. And I think that that's a very powerful and healthy condition. I think the relationship that, let's say, Mendes Rocha had with Bulimax or Oscar Niemeyer is completely different now. It's not about suddenly bringing in landscape. It's actually integrated into the way in which the two things are symbiotic. I think that that's, you know, if anything, if there's a kind of more collaborative spirit, that is the collaborative spirit, the way in which the conversation is interwoven. With the intention being aligned. And the intention being aligned is really, really important.
Okay, so thank you, David.
No, it's such a pleasure.
Thank you, Casa da Arquitetura. It was a pleasure.
Vai fechar a sessão Vanessa Grossman, co-curadora da exposição Geografias Construídas, Paulo Mendes da Rocha.
Thank you, Vanessa. Really great.
Eu já posso. Tem um slide. Sim. Okay. Ó, vou começar. Esse vai ser, acho que, o começo da visita guiada. Para quem, não sei se todos que estão aqui vão para a visita guiada depois, mas a hora da gente começar a visita guiada era agora. Então, eu vou introduzir, mas eu não queria fechar essa exposição sem um discurso sobre o projeto e uma homenagem ao co-curador, que não está aqui, que é uma situação bastante delicada e inusitada. Bom, meu nome é Vanessa Grossman, eu sou co-curadora da exposição Geografias Construídas Paulo Mendes da Rocha, co-organizadora do catálogo da exposição de mesmo título, da qual eu falaria em alguns minutos, mas antes de mais nada eu queria agradecer à Casa da Arquitetura, a sua bela e generosa equipe do diretor Nuno Sampaio, por terem me confiado, junto ao grande historiador e curador Jean-Louis Cohen, essa grande missão e aventura intelectual e cultural, da qual eu tenho orgulho de fazer parte. Agradeço também a todos os nossos colaboradores e parceiros nesse projeto, são muitos os nomes, eu não vou listar todos aqui, senão a gente não sai daqui para ir para a exposição. E um projeto desse porte sempre se faz em equipe, ele é sempre coletivo e eu queria enfatizar isso. Então hoje é um dia simbólico, não está funcionando na verdade. Tem que apontar para onde? Computador? Ah, não funciona. Ah, não é o próximo. É o segundo. Está funcionando? Ah. Mas esse é para frente, esse é para trás. Ah, é. Esse é um dia simbólico para o Finissage, porque é o dia 7 de setembro, que é uma data comemorativa que marca a declaração de independência do Brasil em relação a Portugal, realizada nesse mesmo dia, em 1822, e é também o dia do nascimento do meu filho, Noah. Faz 6 anos, eu me ressinto de estar longe, mas estou feliz de estar aqui, concluindo com vocês. Agradeço a presença de todos, e é um primeiro capítulo de uma saga que eu acho que ainda não acabou, que eu espero que não tenha acabado, porque a gente tem como missão, sobretudo, levar a exposição para o Brasil, mas eu diria mundo afora. E como já disseram muitos, a gente acabou de ouvir esse grande diálogo que foi muito bonito e que me marcou muito. O Paulo Mendes da Rocha é um arquiteto nascido do Brasil, mas a sua obra pertence ao mundo. E é o que marca esse projeto originado desse espaço transatlântico entre o Brasil e Portugal, mas orientado em direção ao futuro da cultura planetária. Eu acho que o Davis também usou essa palavra. E esse foi o ponto de partida, como disse Paulo Mendes da Rocha, um arquiteto que até os seus últimos dias não cessou de exercer o seu pensamento crítico e formular novas ideias e interpretações sobre o mundo, a partir da estética e da política, no sentido mais filosófico dos termos, a independência da mente é o nosso espaço privado. E trata-se de uma poderosa metáfora espacial de liberdade, que ele citou em uma entrevista, relembrando o livro Memórias do Cárcere, de Graciliano Ramos, uma obra que se refere ao período em que o escritor brasileiro esteve preso durante a ditadura militar, e tanto a colonização do Brasil por Portugal, quanto a colonização interna que a ditadura militar promoveu, marcaram o pensamento crítico e a obra de Paulo Mendes da Rocha, assim como a sua carreira e aquela de um dos seus maiores interlocutores, Vila Nova Artigas. Vocês não conseguem ler aqui, mas é uma carta do André Lursat, um dos heróis do Jean-Louis Cohen, né, que era um arquiteto comunista francês, que passou da cultura neoclássica, do realismo socialista, para o modernismo, um interlocutor do Le Corbusier também. É uma carta de apoio quando Artigas foi preso em 1966, o momento em que o Artigas e o Paulo tiveram seus direitos civis cassados. Então, Paulo Mendes da Rocha foi, desde os meados do século XX, não somente um dos arquitetos mais premiados do Brasil, mas certamente um dos seus maiores pensadores, exercendo ambos com um enorme senso de liberdade e lirismo, executando com delicadeza e não brutalidade, apesar do título brutalismo, obras-primas da arquitetura e do design de todo porte. Eu queria mostrar alguma delas aqui, que não estão na exposição, miniaturas que habitam seu escritório, detalhes construtivos, objetos, de componentes a paisagens domésticas insólitas, brilhantes e radicais, paisagens urbanas iconoclastas que quebram com as regras do privilégio. E ele nasceu em 1928 na cidade de Vitória, que era um porto, no estado do Espírito Santo. Segundo algumas estatísticas, é o maior porto de minério de ferro do mundo, isso tem a ver com Portugal, e o maior porto do Brasil em tonelada movimentada. Era dali que escoava todo o ouro para vir para cá. Esse não é um dado banal que eu enfatizo aqui, mas sim um dado que se refere a uma paisagem, a linha do encontro entre o mar aberto e a terra firme, e é uma organização em funcionamento que o fizeram refletir profundamente sobre o espaço antrópico, aquele que a humanidade escolhe para se instalar e explorar a vida na Terra, o espaço da geografia, ou seja, o espaço dos fenômenos físicos, biológicos e sociais, como a primeira arquitetura, como ele costumava dizer. Esse interesse pela arquitetura como geografia e pela geografia como arquitetura, característico da obra de Mendes da Rocha, definiu o conceito principal da exposição que se encerra hoje na Casa da Arquitetura. Para se ter uma ideia da sua geração, Oscar Niemeyer nasceu no Rio em 1907. Paulo era, portanto, 2 décadas mais jovem que o mais notório dos pioneiros da arquitetura moderna brasileira. Mendes da Rocha começou a construir na década de 50, colocando em prática uma abordagem frequentemente associada ao brutalismo, e ele é amplamente reconhecido por ter transformado a paisagem urbana de São Paulo, onde viveu a maior parte da sua vida e onde eu também vivi parte da minha. Dentre os seus edifícios mais conhecidos estão o Museu Brasileiro de Escultura, o MUB, notável por seu engajamento com o terreno, pela sua estrutura ousada, a reforma da Pinacoteca do Estado, uma ocupação, como ele dizia, uma ocupação política, como ele dizia, com suas ousadas inserções de metal e residências particulares excepcionais, começando pela sua própria. Em 2006, ele se tornou o segundo arquiteto brasileiro, depois de Niemeyer, a ganhar o Pritzker. Desde que fomos convidados a integrar uma equipe curatorial e começamos a desenvolver esse projeto, a partir de março de 2021, vocês conseguem ouvir? Funciona, né? Jean-Louis Cohen e eu discutimos longamente como abordar o trabalho de Paulo Mendes da Rocha hoje. Eu acho que o Nuno Grande evocou várias das questões que estavam no backdrop dessa exposição, a mudança climática, muito além da especificidade em termos do medium ou da matéria de seus projetos e obras construídas em concreto e aço, muitas vezes estigmatizada sobre a rubrica de brutalismo, como eu mencionei, e um dos termos que Jean-Louis diria tão enganoso como o slogan estilo internacional. Mas também refletimos sobre o que significa hoje, vocês não conseguem ver a imagem, mas isso aqui é uma imagem, e eu vou falar dela, das eleições agora de 2024, e do destino que quer se dar para o Cais das Artes, transformando num hospital, uma caricatura. Sobre o que significa hoje empreender um projeto supostamente monográfico, focado em um único arquiteto de uma grande obra, que, entretanto, trabalhou de forma colaborativa, e cujo trabalho eu não ousaria chamar de cânone arquitetônico, devido às implicações do que é um cânone no sul global. Paulo Mendes da Rocha ainda tem projetos inacabados em São Paulo e Vitória, cujos canteiros de obras perecem sob o sol e sob a chuva, edifícios que estão sendo transformados, descaracterizados, e depois de enfrentar tantos desafios ao longo de sua carreira, cujo começo triunfal, já com a obra-prima do Clube Atlético Paulistano, foi surpreendida por uma ditadura militar que durou 2 décadas, mas da qual ele se sobressaiu de forma ainda mais triunfal com um projeto como o MUB. A nossa missão, aliada à missão da Casa da Arquitetura, é a de que Paulo Mendes da Rocha poderá ter um reconhecimento ainda maior e à altura da sua obra magistral, depois dessa primeira grande retrospectiva de seu trabalho, feita desde o estabelecimento de seus arquivos e legado nesta instituição cultural. A exposição, bem como o livro, foram, portanto, desenvolvidos a partir da hipótese formulada no projeto de Paulo Mendes da Rocha para o pavilhão de Osaka, na Expo 70, né? A gente vai ter uma nova Expo ano que vem, em Osaka, no qual uma estrutura de concreto expansiva flutua sob um solo atormentado. Ecoando esse objeto efêmero, mas oportuno, o seu trabalho é entendido como inscrito em espaço dinâmico e determinado pela expansão horizontal da Terra, com o qual edifícios e projetos, em todas as escalas, desde a pequena residência até as maiores instalações públicas, dialogam. Enraizada na leitura original da modernidade, sugerida pelos arquitetos e designers de São Paulo, essa estratégia permitiu que Paulo Mendes da Rocha desistisse, sem esforço, ao pós-modernismo e moldasse uma percepção precoce dos riscos da destruição ambiental planetária e da posição das Américas nela. Um dos principais objetivos desse projeto foi, portanto, de estimular novas interpretações da obra de Paulo Mendes da Rocha, colocando a sua arquitetura no mapa mundi ao qual pertencia, como um arquiteto com uma mentalidade planetária. E por isso que fechamos com uma conversa entre 2 grandes, com esse legado sobre Paulo Mendes da Rocha, para além do Brasil e das Américas, o Nuno Grande e o David Adjaye. Entre os tópicos, que atravessam o trabalho de Paulo Mendes da Rocha e que exploramos na exposição e no livro, estavam a paixão pela água e a consciência do sistema hídrico global, uma abordagem consciente e inventiva dos outros recursos naturais da terra e dos materiais construídos, especialmente o concreto e o aço, a relação entre a natureza e a cultura, incluindo uma retórica política em relação às questões referidas pelo antropólogo brasileiro Darcy Ribeiro como processo civilizatório dos povos americanos. Para Ribeiro, os povos das Américas foram formados culturalmente por meio do seu contato com a natureza, mediado por grandes revoluções tecnológicas rumo à urbanização e ao desenvolvimento que eu enfatizo entre aspas, pois nem sempre essa ideologia do desenvolvimentismo atuou em nome do bem comum. Algo que, por um lado, fazia parte da retórica de Paulo Mendes da Rocha, e eu acho que da sua abordagem, porque ele sempre foi contrário, por exemplo, à criação de uma nova capital do Brasil, Brasília. Ele dizia, a navegação da grande rede hidroviária do Brasil, que ele desenha aqui, não dá para ver muito bem, e as ligações necessárias e fáceis de imaginar entre o Atlântico e o Pacífico obrigariam à construção de inúmeras cidades como uma utilidade mais interessante do que aquilo que já estava feito, que era a capital no Rio de Janeiro. Ou seja, não era uma crítica aos palácios de Brasília, ele dizia, nem uma crítica à formação de novas cidades, mas ele achava que os rios, a navegação era um grande vetor para digamos assim, essa expansão de uma civilização nas Américas. Paulo Mendes da Rocha foi, sobretudo, um professor e, mais importante, ele fez escola, como dizemos no Brasil. E é onde a ontologia histórica desse grande arquiteto encontra o destino de algumas pessoas aqui envolvidas, incluindo o meu próprio. Paulo Mendes da Rocha se aposentou em 98, um ano antes do meu ingresso na FAUSP, na Faculdade de Arquitetura da Universidade de São Paulo, como professores, mas foi esse período de ingresso como professores de muitos dos seus ex-alunos e colaboradores, ou mesmo aqueles que reabilitaram seu trabalho depois da ditadura e que foram os meus mestres. Aqui são fotos da defesa de trabalho final de graduação da Marina Caiaba. Começamos junto esse projeto. Paulo Mendes da Rocha na banca, junto com o Ângelo Butti, Colonelli, grandes colaboradores que de alguma forma, participaram da minha formação. Eu devo a esses arquitetos, muitos dos quais mulheres também, empoderadas no universo masculino da arquitetura. Eles mediaram tudo que eu aprendi, tudo que aprenderam de Paulo Mendes da Rocha, a minha própria formação, e que, de alguma forma, orientaram ou mesmo moldaram o meu senso estético, a minha visão política de mundo. E eu me encontro aqui também diante, isso era uma homenagem ao David Adjaye, que foi professor de Princeton quando eu fiz meu doutorado, e acho que eu acho que é um momento bonito de encontro entre diferentes mestres que acabaram cruzando o meu caminho, né? E voltando para esse lado do Atlântico em que estamos, esse projeto dedicado a Paulo Mendes da Rocha na Casa da Arquitetura, eu tive a chance de colaborar uma vez mais com o meu professor e mentor, desde que ingressei em Princeton, Jean-Louis Cohen, que muito me ensinou sobre o potencial de exposições na construção de um público para a arquitetura, e é a ele que eu pretendo dedicar essa segunda parte da minha apresentação, já que eu não tive a chance de homenageá-lo no ano passado, quando ele se tornou postumamente membro honorário dessa instituição que nos acolhe. Esse projeto não poderia ser mais especial para mim, marcando o encontro com esses dois professores, Paulo Mendes da Rocha e Jean-Louis Cohen. Em 7 de agosto de 2023, como alguns de vocês aqui hoje, eu perdi um professor, um mentor, um interlocutor e um colaborador. Isso aqui era uma imagem da Bienal de Arquitetura, da qual eu fui co-curadora, que aconteceu no Sesc 24 de maio, que a gente era uma exposição dedicada ao cotidiano, à reemergência do cotidiano em arquitetura, e a gente chamava esse edifício como o Manifesto da Vida Cotidiana de São Paulo. Mas eu vou voltar aqui para a minha fala sobre o meu colaborador. Jean-Louis Cohen foi uma bússola científica e acadêmica, não somente para mim, mas para pessoas de todo o mundo, que tiveram a honra de aprender com seu caráter terno, curioso e bem-humorado, com seu rigor, conhecimento e erudição de tirar o fôlego. Eu enuncio essa parte da final da minha fala, é uma brincadeira entre o Atlântico e o Turbo, em referência a um peixe chamado rodovalho, acho que todos vocês aqui conhecem, eu não conhecia, o Turbo, em francês, refletindo sobre o papel de Jean-Louis Cohen nesse que foi o nosso último projeto junto. Geografias Construídas, Paulo Mendes da Rocha, é de fato a última exposição curada por Jean-Louis Cohen. O catálogo que acompanha, que eu gostaria de ter em mãos hoje, mas ele ainda não acabou de ser impresso, também pode ser um dos seus últimos livros. Jean-Louis foi o insider-outsider de que precisávamos para administrar as emoções e o conhecimento em torno desse projeto que nasceu da doação dos arquivos do arquiteto Paulo Mendes da Rocha a serem repatriados da antiga colônia do Brasil para a metrópole de Portugal, a fim de preservar o seu legado, na visão dele. Para desenvolver esse projeto cultural de 2021 a 2023, Jean-Louis e eu construímos uma ponte entre os dois lados do Atlântico. O Brasil e São Paulo, meu país, cidade onde cresci, ainda era um país e uma cidade onde Jean-Louis era um membro de alto escalão. Com as suas incomparáveis habilidades intelectuais, criativas e linguísticas e humanas, Jean-Louis Cohen encarnou o diplomata transatlântico e o fez de maneira mais graciosa possível. Não é de surpreender que ele tenha acabado lendo, compreendendo e até mesmo falando os idiomas de Portugal e do Brasil. Ele sempre falava da analogia para a relação entre o português europeu e americano, e o inglês europeu e americano. Ele sempre evocava uma passagem de uma obra de Oscar Wilde, que escreveu em 1887, em um conto intitulado The Canterville Ghost, e eu cito: nós realmente temos estudos em comum com a América hoje em dia, exceto, é claro, o idioma, falando entre a relação entre Portugal e Brasil. Quando nós colaboramos em uma exposição de 2015 na Cité de l'Architecture et du Patrimoine, em Paris, dedicada ao Atelier d'Urbanisme et d'Architecture, AUA, uma cooperativa de arquitetos e geógrafos, economistas, a gente chamou esse projeto de Uma Arquitetura do Engajamento. Embora o Jean-Louis fosse mais jovem, os primeiros contatos de Jean-Louis com a arquitetura foram por meio desse grupo geracional que aderiu à ideia existencialista de engajamento, enfatizada por Sartre e outros filósofos franceses após a guerra, agindo não como um fim em si mesmo, mas como uma existência autêntica, para fazer história. Jean-Louis foi um protagonista de sua própria vanguarda, que ele conceituou e historicizou de forma crítica. Para Jean-Louis Cohen, fazer história, tanto no sentido literário quanto existencial do termo, era deixar uma marca não apenas na cultura, mas na definição mais ampla do que é a cultura no alcance do alcance da arquitetura dentro dela. Inscrever a arquitetura como parte de histórias culturais, científicas, sociais e políticas mais amplas, e estudar períodos que carecem de iconografia adequada na história da arquitetura, como a Segunda Guerra Mundial. Parte dessa iconografia foi imortalizada em outro marco do legado de Jean-Louis, nós falamos hoje sobre ele, o Pavilhão Francês, ganhador de menção honrosa da 14ª Exposição de Arquitetura da Bienal de Veneza, Modernidade, Promessa ou Ameaça, para a qual tive a oportunidade de contribuir como curadora assistente. Foi meu primeiro trabalho como curadora junto ao Jean-Louis. E essa foi uma resposta à provocação de Rencourt, pensando o legado entre o nacionalismo e a globalização de 1914 a 2014 na época. E o Jean-Louis contribuiu muito cedo para a consolidação da arquitetura como disciplina, de suas instituições educacionais, culturais, de conservação e políticas, e de seus agentes públicos em todo o mundo. Foi o que ele fez novamente com esse projeto transatlântico entre Brasil e Portugal, com tudo que produzimos em torno dessa exposição. Reunir diferentes contextos geográficos, aqui é uma homenagem ao nosso amigo, e narrativas foi muito mais do que um projeto histórico intelectual. Foi uma missão social para a arquitetura e seus campos relacionados, e um trabalho de vida que Jean-Louis realizou de maneira incomparável. Nessa missão social para a arquitetura, Jean-Louis Cohen também contribuiu para a formação de uma comunidade global, intergeracional de alunos e colegas que ele foi capaz de influenciar e nutrir com um forte senso de generosidade e anti-institucionalismo, embora fosse um construtor de instituições. É provável que muitos de nós estejamos juntos aqui, é o caso, eu sei. Sua missão foi titânica, mas o que sempre me impressionavam jovens estudantes como eu, contactavam pela primeira vez, dos cantos mais remotos do planeta, era o quanto ele era dedicado a eles. Jean-Louis era o oposto do mestre pomposo, uma frase que quem entra na arquitetura pode ver que ele usou para descrever o Paulo Mendes da Rocha em um depoimento que filmamos para a Casa da Arquitetura. Mas eu também gostaria de evocar o rodovalho, um peixe achatado, também conhecido em inglês como flounder e turbo em francês. É um peixe, bom, o peixe cujo cheiro a gente pode sentir aqui em torno da Casa da Arquitetura, foi o conceito de design. E aqui eu quero mostrar, vamos ver o peixe em várias... Foi o conceito, e aqui eu começo um pouco a visita guiada, que desenvolvemos para o projeto da exposição, com os grandes arquitetos portugueses Eduardo Souto de Moura e Nuno Graça Moura, com quem tivemos a honra e o prazer de dialogar nessa empreitada, e a quem aproveito para agradecer, assim como aos designers gráficos Lizar Ramalho e Arthur Rebelo da equipe R2. Então, nesse projeto, Souto de Moura e Nuno Graça Moura, a coluna vertebral do peixe, pontuada por espinhas, serviu para organizar e implantar o conhecimento no espaço, como Jean-Louis costumava dizer, enquanto refletia sobre... Aqui a gente vai ver vários desenhos, se vocês forem percorrer os arquivos dessa exposição na Casa da Arquitetura, vocês vão ver muitos croquis de peixe. Enquanto refletia sobre a apresentação das coisas e o que ele também chamava de construção espacial de um propósito. Jean-Louis Cohen me ensinou tudo o que sei sobre fazer livros e exposições arquitetônicas, que ele sempre dizia não serem a mesma coisa, mas que poderiam se complementar. E as exposições eram para Jean-Louis Cohen uma oportunidade de produção cultural, para transmitir um projeto pedagógico, uma mensagem científica e política, bem como para trocar e compartilhar conhecimento. Eu mostro aqui os alunos que participaram dessa exposição, concebendo criticamente as maquetes que terminam o percurso expositivo. Geografias Construídas Paulo Mendes da Rocha é um projeto que busca expandir a noção de monografia. Fizemos o mesmo com a UA, Une Architecture de l'Engagement, cuja narrativa se desdobrou em temas que, em última análise, formaram uma crônica cultural e política do último quarto do século XX na França, e em seus territórios expandidos. Eu diria que essa exposição também, de alguma forma, é uma leitura cultural e política do Brasil, ou das Américas. E ele falava sempre... Desculpa, eu estou indo um pouco rápido. Quero fazer um livro que seja útil e aí sai a ideia do catálogo, um livro que fosse útil para pesquisadores e também que desse uma ideia do que os pesquisadores podem encontrar nesse acervo. Essa ideia de transmissão é muito importante. E é por isso que a gente fez um livro que fosse engajando diferentes gerações e diferentes interlocutores no mundo que pudessem engajar com a obra de Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Esse volume é editado muito denso, ricamente ilustrado. Ele vai estar disponível em português e inglês, com uma equipe de pesquisadores, mas também arquitetos que escreveram, oferecendo uma visão abrangente da carreira do Paulo Mendes da Rocha e da dimensão coletiva do seu trabalho. E enfatizamos a identidade de Mendes da Rocha como arquiteto sul-americano, mas também de sua relação com o mundo. Então, aqui é um pouco de publicidade. Para quem lê inglês, o livro já pode ser pré-encomendado no site da Yale University Press, que distribuirá a versão em inglês do livro assim que ele for sair da press. Mas nos bastidores da exposição, em uma nota mais pessoal, sempre que estávamos em Matosinhos, Jean-Louis Cohen pedia apenas turbot ou rodovalho, um peixe que ele me apresentou e que compartilhávamos em quase todas as refeições. Ele sempre nos falava sobre esse fabuloso peixe achatado que vive nos fundos arenosos do Atlântico, mas que, pelo que sei, não pode ser encontrado na costa brasileira. Em algum momento, durante os anos em que trabalhamos juntos nesse projeto, desde 2021, eu me cansei de comer o turbot. Mas eu nunca ousei dizer uma palavra a Jean-Louis para convencê-lo a compartilhar outro peixe ou outro prato, porque ele estava muito satisfeito. Então, esses foram momentos, aqui um pouco nos bastidores da exposição, inesquecíveis de compartilhamento gastronômico com ele, com atores de diferentes cidades que viajamos juntos para esse projeto também. Eu nunca imaginei que seriam os últimos, mas eu quero evocá-los para lembrar a todos do detalhe humano, não apenas na própria forma como Jean-Louis Cohen historicizava a obra da arquitetura, e vocês vão ter um encontro com a cara do Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Eu acho que esse detalhe do humano, de que nós somos humanos, arquitetos são humanos, emoções, invejas, paixões, problemas fazem parte da carreira de um arquiteto e do coletivo da arquitetura. Mas também, antes de mais nada, para falar da sua humanidade, da humanidade de Jean-Louis Cohen e da maneira como ele se relacionava com as pessoas. Aqui, uma exceção no cardápio, lagosta, em vez de rodovalho. E o jornalista português Miguel Esteves Cardoso, e foi meu amigo Joaquim Moreno, mais uma vez aparecendo na minha fala, que me chamou a atenção para falar sobre esse peixe. E esse jornalista escreveu ao rodovalho, em 2012, ele escreveu: procure um rodovalho no mar e verá como depressa se esquecerá do pregado. É um peixe à parte. Confundi-los é insultá-los. É uma pena. Sempre que puder, eu vou comer o turbot. Eu não sei se era rodovalho ou se era o pregado, mas é o que comíamos aqui com Jean-Louis Cohen. E isso também me traz à mente uma outra referência literária que eu gostaria de evocar, um romance épico escrito em 1977 pelo escritor alemão Günter Grass, chamado em francês Le Turbot. Apesar da tradução do livro em Portugal ser pregado, né, nos restaurantes que comemos com Jean-Louis, como digo, todo mundo traduzia turbot como rodovalho. Então, não sei, é algo a ser esclarecido. Mas eu queria citar esse livro porque trata-se de eu vou citar uma longa história da arte culinária, uma fábula de um herói tão imortal quanto o peixe que ele pesca. Então, eu acho que é uma grande homenagem ao Jean-Louis. E eu queria dizer também que o Le Turbot é um livro que fala sobre a emancipação das mulheres. E eu queria falar que é muito doloroso pensar que há pouco mais de um ano inauguramos juntos essa exposição em Portugal e que não podemos encerrá-la junto. Apesar da sua inversão a tons hagiográficos, a história dos santos, ele sempre falava isso, alguém que viveu como ele, como Paulo Mendes da Rocha, nunca morre. Eu já fosse a terceira que vai evocar essa fala de Paulo Mendes da Rocha, que tinha uma visão muito positiva sobre a morte, né? Ele falava: até diante da morte temos uma grande liberdade. Não se pode saber o que é a morte. A morte simplesmente não é. Ou seja, não existe a morte, só existe a vida. E como disse o Nuno, não nascemos para morrer, nascemos para continuar. E eu queria dizer, Paulo Mendes da Rocha também dizia que preservar é um ato político. Preserva-se ou não, significa dizer que memória é a lembrança do que você quiser ter da coisa. A memória não existe em si, ela é construída. Como grande historiador, escritor e curador, Jean-Louis dedicou sua vida à construção da memória daquilo que foi construído. Então, eu queria dizer obrigado, merci, caro Jean-Louis, Paulo Mendes da Rocha, um brinde à vida e que a sua memória seja viva, dinâmica, livre e, no que depender de mim e de todos os envolvidos comigo nessa empreitada, transmitindo o seu conhecimento, e eu digo de ambos, ela o será e vocês dois continuarão. É isso. Obrigada.
Obrigado por terem vindo. Lembramos que a co-curadora Vanessa Grossman e o diretor executivo Nuno Sampaio fazem de seguida uma visita guiada à exposição Geografias Construídas Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Logo depois, às 18h, estão todos convidados para a projeção do filme Pele de Vidro de Denise Mecol, aqui mesmo no espaço Álvaro Siza.